patience with us. Inshallah, just a very, very brief intro. My name is Yasir Qadhi. I'm the president of the Islamic Society here at SOAS. Alhamdulillah, this year we've been honored and privileged to be hosting Shaykh Yasir Qadhi all the way from the USA. Inshallah, so we can save as much time as possible, just a brief Antonio of what's going to be happening today. Inshallah, now I'm going to be passing on to Umar Salih, the founder and head of Ramadan 10 project. Well, inshallah, he's giving a brief description of what Ramadan 10 is and what they do. And then inshallah, from there, there will be a discussion with Shaykh Yasir Qadhi, followed by a small video and talk by Human Appeal, who have brought him down to the UK. And after that, inshallah, will be the Q&A. So now I'd like to pass on to Umar. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Apologies once again for the lateness. I apologize on behalf of Human Appeal. I'm looking at Asif here. I apologize on behalf of the train network in the UK.
Like Richard Branson.
And Richard Branson, of course. But more importantly, alhamdulillah, I'm really, really happy to have Shaykh Yasir Qadhi with us here today. My name is Umar Salih. I'm the founder and director of Ramadan 10 project, otherwise known as RTP. This is our first main event here in collaboration with the ISOC, and inshallah many more events in the future with a talk series. And we're grateful to be focusing primarily on 3 key themes, but not, ultimately, I'm sure the discussion will go on more than that, looking at identity, activism, and scholarship. And the title today is Challenges and Solutions in the 21st Century. We are predominantly here, the youth, as like the UN definition is anyone below the age of 35. I won't pick out the people who are above 35. But, so we're looking at contemporary issues, real life issues we hope to touch today, and to take knowledge from the Shaykh who can advise us on these things. Ramadan 10 project, very, very briefly, started in 2011. It's an organization that's founded here at SOAS actually, and now has moved across to Manor Street Gardens. The flagship project is hosting open iftars during the month of Ramadan, inviting Muslims and non-Muslims and the homeless and the community at large to come and join with us. The aim, if you will, the objective is very, very simple: sharing a meal in the central of London during the month of Ramadan as a gateway for people to come and understand the Islamic faith. Primarily because of the sort of the media and the climate here in the country targeting Muslims. It's an opportunity for us to actually say, come with open arms and have an insight into maybe a religion which is alien to many, and creates a sense of phobia. So we're very, very, by the blessings of Allah, alhamdulillah, we are now in 7 cities. We're actually in Canada and the US. Last year, our first trip across the pond. We are expanding to 8 cities this year. We have actually also started a new project working on warming the homeless during these very, very cold months, as you all very know. Collecting clothes, winter clothes, and giving them out, distributing them in London. And we are very, very privileged to be here, and we thank the ISOC as well, who have actually helped us put this event together. We are very grateful and fortunate the Human Appeal have come to us and to put this event together as well. And it's in collaboration, and we hope that you all, inshallah, will gain much, much benefit from this. Finally, some household not issues, but announcements to make. In case of a fire exit, the exit obviously is the one you came through here, the entrance. Otherwise, we have an exit through the back here. Please do bear in mind we normally have barriers alongside, but for some reason the barriers are not there. So if in the nature of the event becoming a bit too much for you, you may doze off and sleep and fall off, please don't do that. I hope the event will be much more exciting. And also follow us on hashtag, I believe it's Yasir at SOAS, or YQ, sorry, hashtag YQ at SOAS. So we are on Facebook Live, so to everyone around the globe. We are on Facebook Live, so any questions you have, you can't be here physically with us in London, please send in your questions using that hashtag. And I'll be on my phone, not checking my WhatsApp or Facebook, but actually making sure your questions are coming through as well, inshallah. So I'll have Shaykh Yasir Qadhi say a few words, an intro, but most importantly, how was your trip to the UK?
Let me change the angle of my seat because I seem to have my back to some of you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala ma ba'd. Firstly, sincere apologies. The train was supposed to arrive at 11:15, but apparently there was a train that broke down ahead of us, so we just sat there for over an hour until that train was fixed. So my apologies, and I appreciate your patience here. Secondly, the trip has, as usual, been absolutely packed with activities. Every time I come to England, it's mashallah, tabarakallah, there's so much excitement, so much enthusiasm. I was in Birmingham yesterday. We had a fundraiser over there and a meeting with many of the ulama and du'at. Before that, I was in Manchester teaching a class that has proven to be one of the most popular classes at Al-Maghrib Institute, and that is the class that deals with modern theology. It deals with the problems of being a Muslim in the West. And the very fact that we're getting such an amazing response, when I taught the class in London, we had almost 800 people, which was, and this is a 2.5-day class, which is the largest class ever taught here. And it deals with just Islamic identity. It deals with living in a secular, liberal, humanistic, democratic society. It deals with the rise of atheism, agnosticism, scientism. It deals with trying to reconcile Darwinism with the Quran. I mean, these are topics that are of a modern nature, and every one of us is grappling with them at some level. And alhamdulillah, the course has been taught around 14, 15 times. And I learn and the students learn, and we benefit together. I'd just like to point out about that course, by the way, and about the realities of these topics. One of the problems that we face is that, and we're going to see this in the course of our conversation, I hope, a lot of times we don't have definitive answers for a lot of these questions. A lot of times it's really, we're grappling with modernity. We're grappling with our tradition, and it's apparent, if you like, break with modernity. It's apparent dissonance with modernity. And a lot of times there really is a struggle that we need to think things through deeply. We have to fine-tune our tradition in some matters, and we have to critique modernity in other matters. But inshallah ta'ala, I have found it to be very plausible, very challenging, but it is very doable. And also, one of the best things, we're going to hopefully get to this point as well, one of the things that I've noticed about most of our modern day problems is that we take for granted certain assumptions about modernity that are simply incorrect. We take for granted a basic premise where we begin our paradigm from, and we begin to question the Quran, and we never question our paradigm. We question the Sunnah, and we never question our society. So one of the points of that course is actually a brief history of these trends in the West. Where does humanism come from? Where does secularism come from? Where does atheism come from? So when you contextualize modernity, all of a sudden modernity is not some shibboleth that you cannot criticize. It doesn't become some sacred cow that you cannot sacrifice. Rather, modernity does become a dogmatic tradition in and unto itself. And this is something that requires a courage, if you like, to break away, because our society has taken these values to be essentially the way we consider divine values. You cannot question them. And it requires a huge amount of intellectual effort and also courage, and also we will find people and sympathizers who are not necessarily Muslims but are pointing out the double standards of issues of modernity. Anyway, I'm jumping the gun. The point was, how was my trip? Well, all of it. Inshallah. No, in a summary, you can see what's going on.
No, I think you touched upon a lot of important things here, which inshallah I'm very, very certain we'll have a lot of the questions from the audience and people who are following us on Facebook Live and on Twitter as well to come in with their comments and questions.
Inshallah.
But yeah, tell us, so how long have you been in London? When did you arrive?
3 minutes ago, literally. I just got here right now.
So the UK, sorry.
UK, London. See, okay. UK, I arrived here Friday morning. I arrived to Manchester and they gave the khutbah at a very beautiful Victorian mansion. It's called the British Heritage Centre or something like that. It's a £10 million Victorian structure. It's a very beautiful structure, mashallah. It has a lot of potential, but it's not being used the way it should be. But I just found it's a very, for me, it's iconic that something as Victorian and as beautiful as this classical structure is now a British Muslim Heritage Centre. And inshallah we can read into that the face of British Islam is changing, and it is adapting, and it is entrenching its roots here, and alhamdulillah, and the whole class was there. So I found it to be symbolic that in this 17th century, 18th century, absolutely gorgeous mansion with fields and everything, we're actually having the largest Islamic class Manchester's ever had. Alhamdulillah.
And have you, from my understanding, you were in Birmingham?
Yesterday I was in Birmingham.
And out of Manchester, Birmingham and London, which is your favourite city? No pressure, we are in London.
Each one has its pros and cons, and we'll see, depending on your fish and chips today, apparently.
Our national dish is curry, actually, so I'm not sure you're aware of it.
Well, your national dish is actually an adopted amalgamation of Pakistani and British values. There is no such thing as butter chicken curry anywhere in the world, except in England. So even this is symptomatic, it is symbolic of the future of Islam. Butter chicken curry was invented by the Asians of England for this society. So even in there, you can read in a little bit of the thought process that we're doing.
You could almost write a paper on integration, looking at butter chicken curry.
Looking at cuisine. No, exactly, looking at cuisine. And actually a friend of mine, an academic, is actually doing exactly that. That looking at how cultural values transform via food. Now, I'm not a researcher, but I will do the research, if you get my point. Eating the food. But I want to do the actual research.
I'll join you.
Okay.
But yeah, this is a term which I'm familiar with, culinary diplomacy as well, soft power and ways of fusing different cultures coming together.
Well, in our culture it's called spicy power.
Spicy power?
Okay.
Fair enough.
And it's a joke, guys.
Get the head, guys. We have a guest here from all the way from America, so let's make him feel welcome, okay? Whereabouts are you from in America?
I was born in Houston, Texas, not Houston, Houston, Texas. I lived in Connecticut. I was doing my PhD, and I'm currently living in Memphis, Tennessee, which is known for, who knows what Memphis is known for? Who knows? Yes, Elvis Presley, Graceland. Okay. What else is Memphis known for? Who knows?
Grizzlies.
What?
Grizzlies. Memphis Grizzlies.
I'm surprised you actually know that. Okay, that's a rare point. But it's known for the place where Martin Luther King was assassinated. Okay, that's where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I want to share one point with you, which inshallah will be very interesting to all of you. And again, it shows how Islam is changing. 2 weeks ago, there was a rally against Trump's policies. And as you know, there were 90 rallies across America. And alhamdulillah, we in Memphis, we meaning the population of Memphis, not the Muslims, we organized a rally. In fact, the main people who organized it were the Latinos and the African Americans. And they asked us to join as well. And they got permission to do the rally in front of the Martin Luther King Memorial. So you all know Martin Luther King, you all know he was assassinated. You all must have seen that iconic image of the balcony where he was shot. You remember what I'm talking about, right? That hotel was preserved and converted into the National Civil Rights Museum. So when you go there, the outside is a hotel, but the inside is a museum. And the original room that he slept in, the car, it's all preserved outside. So when you walk out, you actually think you see the exact same. Everything's been preserved. It's a very iconic place in American history. So subhanAllah, we managed to get permission to have our protest there. So we had thousands of people. Majority were non-Muslim, 90% non-Muslim, thousands of people. And there's lawns where the guy shot. There's the lawns over there, right? The place where he shot from, the one who killed him and whatnot. And alhamdulillah, the march was going to start at 5:30, and I was one of the speakers. So I told them, look, our Maghrib Salah comes in at 5:29. Do you mind if you delay the march to 5:40 and we'll pray and then we'll join you? And because of Trump's hatred, people are becoming sympathetic to Islam. So the organizer said, you're not going to pray outside and come to us. You're going to pray in the middle, and we will watch you and symbolically protect you as you pray, and then we'll begin the rally. So subhanAllah, the Muslims, and alhamdulillah, I was leading the Salat al-Maghrib, so I literally prayed, there's a video of it, right in front of the car and the balcony where Martin Luther was assassinated. And it was such a symbolic moment. I mean, the Muslims, including myself, were just overwhelmed. And reciting Quran, and there's microphones everywhere. You hear the recitation of Allah's speech in that iconic area, and the entire crowd is dead silent, just symbolically. It's not as if the police are going to kill us, but symbolically, they're protecting us to pray. And then after that, alhamdulillah, I gave a lecture, and others gave a lecture right at the spot where, the balcony's there, and underneath that was where our platform was. And inshallah, I mean, as Allah says in the Quran, don't think that what has happened, referring to an incident, was evil for you. It shall be good for you. And this is what I feel as well. The rise of hatred and Islamophobia and the far right, in the long run, it will be for our good. And we see some of the effects of that. You know, you ask me personal questions, I always bring in Islam. I think I should just remain personal.
No.
So you bring in the question.
No, it's good. It's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's something which is concerning all of us, and concerning you, obviously, concerning us thinking about, you know, the situation in America, and you brought it up. So let's go on with it. I mean, before that, you said you're from Tennessee. You're also an assistant professor at
Yes.
Rose College. You know, you're not only an a'alim, mashallah, you're actually someone who is academically, you know, well acclaimed and well read, and often, you know, having that fusion is not as common in today's world. Give us a very, very brief summary in terms of your journey in academia, where you started off and how you ended up, what urged you to continue your studies and to continue your scholarship.
So one of the things I hate about life journeys is that it goes into just a bunch of diplomas and degrees, and life is more than just the universities and colleges you studied at, but inevitably that's what it leads up to. Nonetheless, my first degree is in chemical engineering. I graduated with a bachelor's in chemical engineering from the University of Houston. I worked at Dow Chemical, which is one of the famous chemical engineering companies in the world. And it was while I was working at Dow Chemical that I realized I'm just not cut out for this job. I wasn't satisfied. That for me, the way I phrase it, for me, life had more meaning than solving nth degree quadratic equations. Like, I just felt I can't do this for the rest of my life. I don't care how much you pay me. It's not worth it for me personally. And I'm not saying it's just for me, everybody's different. I was not happy despite the salary and the prestige and moving. I just did not like that corporate America, and it just wasn't spiritually fulfilling. So alhamdulillah, Allah gave me the courage to give that up, because it was a temptation. There's no denying it. The world is very luscious and green. And I then went to the Islamic University of Medina and finished a diploma in Arabic, and then did my second bachelor's, which is in Hadith studies. And then I went on for my first master's, which is in theology. And that's when 9/11 happened, when I was doing my MA in theology. And 9/11, and everybody says this, but for me it definitely happened. 9/11 was one of those life-changing moments for me, because it really shook me and awoke me to the reality of a very different world that we're living in. To the reality that I can't just hide in a bubble and just study Islam and go to the masjid, that there's got to be something that I give back to the community. I really have to, and I felt no matter all the Islamophobia rising in America, you know, ironically, I never felt more American than after 9/11. Like, I need to go back and explain to my people why this is happening. It's not because of the religion. You know, why is there so much anger? Because people are blaming the religion, and we all in this room know it's because of political and socioeconomic reasons, right? The religion is just the veneer. The religion is the justification. But if you were to remove the political grievances, if you were to remove the other factors, religion would not lead to terrorism. We know this, right? They don't know it. So I felt a strong urge to go back. So I was slated to be the first Western student to ever get a PhD from Medina. That would have been, and it was a goal of mine at one point in life. But because of this, I changed my goals. As soon as I handed in the MA, I decided to come back to the West. And I applied to a few universities. I was very picky, a bit too picky, I think. And so I applied to 4 universities. I got accepted only 2 of them. Oxford, down the road from here, 1 hour away, and Yale. And it was 3 months of my life wondering which of the 2 should I go to. Okay, believe it or not, my heart was with Oxford. Just the campus is so beautiful, it's so historic. And I visited a few times. You know, the professors were very eager to have me, and I was very interested to come to Oxford. But Allah had willed something better, and I turned it down. Why? Because you guys didn't give any funding. 0 funding for PhD students. Very little, minimal. It was a token amount. Whereas in America, Yale, which is also an Ivy League, a very prestigious university, as you know, at universities like Yale, they pay you a very decent honorarium, a very decent remuneration. And I had a wife and kids, how am I going to do that? So, alhamdulillah, in the end, it worked out for the best, because honestly, for many reasons beyond the scope of this talk, for those of you that are doing a master's PhD, you can talk to me afterwards. I'm not trying to make fun of or diss European PhDs, but there is a marked difference between American PhDs and European PhDs. There's a huge difference between the two of them. And I realized this myself after going through the programs. So I ended up going to Yale, and alhamdulillah, it really was another life-changing experience for me because it was an intellectual change. I mean, one of our problems is our ulama, they, alhamdulillah, but they think in a certain way. And that way, a lot of times, is simply not conducive to tackling the problems of modernity. And I was like that 15 years ago. Going through Yale completely reoriented my framework, my paradigm. It gave me knowledge and tools that I could never have gotten elsewhere. And alhamdulillah, I thank Allah for Medina and for Yale, because really, were it not for both of those, I would not be who I am. I needed the 10 years of Medina, and I needed, well, it took me 8 years, but I was 5 years living at Yale, and then another 3 to finish the PhD. So I did another master's and an MA and an MPhil at Yale, and then I did my PhD. So I am humbled to say that I have been a continuous university student for 22 years of my life. I had a university card for 22 years of my life. 2 bachelors, 3 masters, and a PhD. I have a university card. Allah will that I substitute the university student card for a university professor card, which I still have. So essentially, for 30, no, not 30, but how much? 16 years of my life, I've been carrying a university card for my entire life. So, and it looks like it'll be there for the next foreseeable future. So that in a nutshell, and then I got a job at Rhodes College, which is it's a very prestigious liberal arts college is what it's called. It's a small liberal arts college in Tennessee. And I'm very happy to be there, alhamdulillah. It gives me a foot in academia, and it also allows me to be who I am, to travel, to preach and teach. And alhamdulillah, I'm very, very happy, and I feel Allah has blessed me immensely to have a foot in both worlds, in the Islamic, pastoral and clerical side of things, and also in academia. I'm not as active in academia as I should be. I only have like 4 or 5 papers published. My first book has been accepted, should be coming out soon. I should have had done more if I've been in academia for 6, 7 years, but what I've done is not bad. And the reason is because I'm busy with the Islamic side of things, but alhamdulillah, I have enough of a CV in academia to be a mediocre, inshallah, academic, inshallah.
MashaAllah, very, very humbling to hear all of that. And I wanted to ask you a question actually with regards to academia and your experience in Islamic studies. What, in your opinion, is the gap, or how big is the gap? Is there a gap, first of all? And the second part of that question is, how big is the gap when looking at Islamic studies within academia, Western academia, and Islamic studies in terms of its classical understanding as you have experienced in Medina?
Excellent question. There's not a gap. It's a completely different paradigm. I wouldn't call it a gap. A gap means that the two of them are somewhat similar, and we have to see how we can reconcile or what's the bridge between them. Not at all. There are completely different paradigms. There is no comparison between the two of them. Essentially, when you study Islamic studies in a madrasa, in a seminary, you are studying for the sake of spiritual guidance. You are studying with the presumption that the Book of Allah is the Book of Allah. You're studying with the presumption that your Prophet ﷺ is a lawgiver. Allah has made him into a lawgiver, and you're trying to extract theology. So your paradigms are different. Your questions are different, right? You are not allowed to, even theologically, challenge the Quran and Sunnah, because that is essentially kufr. I mean, you cannot challenge the Quran and Sunnah. So when you come to the Western academia, and also Eastern academia, Eastern studies are comprehensive, A to Z. Eastern studies, you have to master each and every Islamic discipline from the beginning to the end. So you study Islamic morphology, Arabic morphology. You study Arabic linguistics. You study tafsir. You study hadith. You study fiqh. You study theology. Literally every single classical discipline, you need to cover at least an intermediate level book, cover to cover. And then you specialize. So I did hadith. Hadith doesn't mean I didn't do fiqh. No, you do fiqh cover to cover. You do theology, but the hadith is the extra twist. And then you specialize. I did my master's in Islamic aqidah. So the point is that you come out a very well-rounded person studying a tradition of Islam. That tradition is based on your madrasa. If you go to Darul Ulum, you will be a Deobandi. If you go to Azhar, you will be an Azhari with their tradition. If you go to Medina, you will be a Salafi. So each madrasa has its tradition. And by tradition, I mean its group of scholars, its methodology, its understanding of theology and fiqh, its understanding of the madhabs, and you feel confident in your tradition. Generally speaking, you are not exposed to other traditions of Islam except to critique them. So you don't really read outside of your one tradition. If you're a Deobandi, you don't really read the books that we do in Medina. If you're in Medina, you don't really read the books that we do in Azhar. Each one has their own understanding because it's historic. It goes back a few hundred or a few thousand, but at least sometimes 1,000 years. In academia, Western academia, the entire paradigm is different. The questions asked are different. The foundational premises are different. In academia, the question of whether the Quran is from Allah or not is not even asked. That's not pertinent to them. Anybody who's doing, how many of you are doing a degree in SOAS, master's, bachelor's, whatever? So you all know that in academia, these questions are not asked. It's not relevant. You don't ask, is the Prophet a real prophet? That's a theological question, right? Additionally, you do not study encyclopedic knowledge. You don't study fiqh A to Z. You have graduates with PhDs that are specialists in their PhD area, but are complete juhal, ignoramuses, when it comes to right outside their discipline. That is impossible in the Islamic side of things. But in the Western side of things, you are taught to be critical and analytical. You are taught to be comparative. You are taught to be historical. You study the evolution of ideas. You study the culture from within which those ideas came. You situate the causes of the evolution of certain strands of Islam, and you compare them and contrast them to other strands. So your analytical tools are sharpened in Western academia. In the Eastern side, you don't have, by and large, analytical tools, because you are taught rote memorization. You are taught to absorb vast amounts of information and regurgitate, which is very impressive. It is highly impressive. But you are not taught to question, because to question the tradition is tantamount to kufr, or tantamount to blasphemy, or at least heresy. So each of these paradigms has pros and cons. And each of them has foundational premises from within which they emanate. And that is why I'm grateful to Allah to have both of them, because I feel you need that to really take on the challenges of modernity. I also want to say, those of you that are studying in academia, in SOAS, it is imperative that you also ground yourselves in the foundational sciences of Islam. So find a local imam or shaykh and at least do some basic disciplines A to Z. Whatever dissertation you're doing, whatever your specialization is at SOAS, make sure that you complement it, supplement it with an equivalent with the traditional alim. And my strong advice to madrasa students, I was actually with ulama yesterday in Birmingham, a number of imams came together. My advice to many of them that are still young and able to do it, it's very, very important they broaden their horizons. And they do at least a master's, if not a PhD, so that they can contextualize and situate their own tradition. I believe studying the Western methodologies and manners of Islamic studies actually makes you more broad-minded. It makes you understand that your tradition of Islam itself is not divine. It's actually evolving over centuries, right? One of the problems comes, sectarianism is rampant amongst madrasa students. Sectarianism is rampant amongst conservative Muslims. Why? Because they don't engage critically. They literally think that their tradition is Islam. However they found their tradition, they found their forefathers doing something, and what their forefathers did becomes the religion of Allah. And so when they find another group of Muslims who are just as righteous, just as God-fearing, just as pious, who pray differently, say dhikr differently, celebrate the Mawlid or don't celebrate it, if they find a little bit of difference, for them the difference becomes the difference between Islam and unbelief, or at least between orthodoxy and heresy. And when you study in the Western paradigm, you learn to think critically and ask questions you would never ask in the Eastern paradigm. And you learn to analyze where and how ideas change. And the problem comes, and I'll be honest here, if you don't have enough iman in the Quran and in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Western paradigm can easily lead you to start questioning the Quran itself. It's very easy, it's a slippery slope. Because if you wanted to, you could go down that route. And a lot of people have done that. And I consciously had to make a decision. There is a line that needs to be drawn. And after that line, there is blind faith. In the end of the day, there is a harmony and synthesis in Islam between reasoning and between blind faith. The problem of Western academia, they don't believe in blind faith. The Quran praises الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. And the Quran praises those who think, أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. So we're supposed to think, and we're supposed to have blind faith, correct? We're supposed to have both. But there's a healthy balance between that. For some aspects, think. For other aspects, have blind faith. I had to make a conscious decision what that balance is going to be. And every one of you who's dealing with both traditions, you also need to make that conscious decision that beyond that, it's just not safe to go. And you just have to accept. And that was, by the way, the topic of my PhD. The topic of my PhD at Yale, one of the people that I admire immensely, all of you who are at SOAS know of him, is Ibn Taymiyyah, a 13th or 14th century scholar who lived when the Mongols invaded, and he lived at the time of the Mamluks in Syria. And Ibn Taymiyyah was one of the most erudite and prolific intellectuals the Ummah has ever seen. He has written more books than 99% of the scholars of this Ummah. Only 2 or 3 people in our entire history have written as much as him. And one of his most famous books that had not been studied in the West, and I wanted to study it, is called Raising the Conflict Between Reason and Revelation, between intellect and between the Quran. Trying to find out the harmony between philosophy, between thoughts, between rationality, and between the Quran. And it's a 10-volume book. And so my PhD, essentially, I had to read the entire book and I analyzed it and summarized it, and of course I have to critique it in my own way. So I wanted to do this topic of what is the harmonious balance between aql, the intellect, and between naql, and that is the scripture.
I have a question, and I want to continue. If we have, I think some people don't have any seats, so if we can move across here, slight adjustment. There's a few seats here on the right, so if we can move across to allow more space for people that comes to come in, hopefully, and join us. And on this topic, I wanted to actually, you brought up something very, very interesting with regards to the boundary. So the idea of we should understand there is a boundary, we should understand where are our limits when it comes to taking Western academia and taking ultimately critical thinking, and not to use it as a sort of a weapon against Islamic tradition or the tradition of Islamic studies, but actually you mentioned a key word here, which was to complement each other. Now, again, it's a personal journey, and we all will come across a stage where we think, this is where I will go and not go beyond in terms of my critical thinking.
Yes.
Now, is there usul in how one can come to that conclusion? As in, because it's very, I mean, we are in agreement that there are 2 different paradigms. We cannot simply take the tools within Western academia and use them to understand the tradition of Islamic studies. But where do we draw the line? It is a personal journey, but what advice would you give to us?
So I think one of the things we need to start off with is a basic understanding of the role of the intellect in our human lives. One of the problems of modernity, which has been critiqued in postmodernism, right? And by the way, postmodernist studies are essential for all Muslims in academia. You need to be able to critique modernity, because the problem comes, modernity assumes that it is infallible. The values of modernity value the intellect. Modernity, the age of enlightenment, the age of reason. People thought in that time frame, the 17th, 18th, 19th century even, they thought that essentially the intellect is infallible. That if we Engage critically with the Bible, with science, with whatnot. All truths shall be unveiled unto us. And this is, of course, an extension of Plato. It's an extension of Socrates. The notion that simply through dialogue and through intellectual engagement, through sophistry, you will arrive at ultimate truths. And for the longest time, 200, 250 years, the Western world absorbed this, imbibed it. It became a shibboleth that you cannot challenge this, right? The intellect is almost divine, if not divine. In fact, the intellect is stronger than the divine for them because they allowed the intellect to reject the divine. Okay? Well, in the last 30, 40 years, the field of postmodernism, as all of you who are in SOAS should know, has critiqued modernism and has demonstrated that modernism, which thought that it is breaking free from the shackles of tradition, is in fact nothing other than its own tradition. And so postmodernism has demonstrated that modernism itself is a type of dogmatic tradition. And it has certain presumptions that cannot be based on actual reason. Now, the problem of postmodernism, and Nietzsche kind of sort of predicts this in his The Gay Science, or the politically correct translation is the Enlightened Science. When I was in college, it was called the Gay Science, but now it's called the Enlightened Science, right? So Nietzsche kind of sort of predicted this in his metaphor on the death of God. Do you guys know the story? You're all at SOAS, so I'm assuming you've read Nietzsche and whatnot. You know his metaphor of God is dead, the story? If you don't know, I'll quickly summarize it for you. It's a very interesting point, because Nietzsche is considered to be one of the people who kind of predicts postmodernism. What Nietzsche wrote in his parable, you know the famous phrase that Nietzsche said, God is dead. You must have heard of that phrase. This is found in his book, The Enlightened Science, right? Or The Gay Science. And it deals with the parable. It's 2 pages long. The parable of the crazy man coming into an enlightened village who has abandoned God. Okay? The crazy man believes in God, and the enlightened people have abandoned God. So the crazy man wanders into this enlightened village, and he's searching for God. And he's going around knocking on doors. Where's the church? Where's God? I don't see anything here. Because every city has a church, and so the enlightened people gather around him, and they start to make fun of the crazy man. It's like, where is God? And that's when one of them says the kufr phrase, God is dead. That's when he says that God is dead. It's like he's gone. We don't believe in God anymore. We are modern people. We're enlightened people. We have killed God. Now, Nietzsche was one of the main people who actually opened this door for getting rid of God and religion. But he predicted it has repercussions. So what happens? The blind man then gives a 2-3 paragraph critique of them having killed God. And in it, he demonstrates that by killing God, you have essentially killed yourselves. How have you killed God? With which instrument? And who will you ask for forgiveness when you've killed the one who would forgive you? And what have you done with your life? And so the point is that he points out, once you've removed religion, you have nothing left. In fact, if I can quote from it, it says literally like, now up is down and down is up and left is right and right is left and dark is light and light is dark. Meaning, there is no anchor for morality, for virtue, for the purpose of life. There's nothing left. Once you remove God and you remove religion and remove a divine book, there is nothing left that can anchor you in anything that is certain. So he's predicting that modernity will discover its emptiness and shallowness, right? So what we need to do as intellectual Muslims is to understand that the intellect has a role. And Islam is never irrational, but there are aspects of Islam that are supra-rational, beyond rationality. Islam is never irrational, but there are aspects that are supra-rational. And we also need to understand, and postmodernity does a very good job of this, and there are a lot of surveys and academic papers and scientific experiments done. Postmodernity has done an amazing job of demonstrating that the quote-unquote intellect or rationality is very subjective. What a person who has been born and raised in a particular environment believes to be rational is not necessarily what a person raised in a different environment believes to be rational. And in fact, they have done, philosophical question surveys. What if this happens? What would you do? And people who are raised in an Eastern culture typically answer very differently than those raised in a Western culture. In other words, their rationality changes. Now this is something we all understand at this level, inshallah. Rationality is subjective. What I really like of Ibn Taymiyyah, he pointed this out before anybody had ever mentioned anything like this. He didn't use the word subjective, but essentially he's saying rationality is a product of your own upbringing, of your own values. So what you think is rational is simply that, what you think is rational. The person next to you could derive something very different as being absolutely rational, and it opposes what you think is rational. So, and we see this, by the way, in so many different strands of various groups that are fighting over their various issues and whatnot. I mean, in America, simple question: if you don't have a religion, what do you say about abortion? How do you decide abortion? It's something that you need a higher source to tell you. There is no rational means of coming together and deciding, is conception life, is it not life? There's no this is an ethical question that requires divine guidance, okay? The same goes for our mores on sexuality, right? If consent is the only criterion for sexuality, then by what legal system will you prohibit consensual sex between siblings? Or even more disgusting than this, between adult parents and children. But if the criterion of sex is consent and only consent, then by which philosophical premise, by which legal theory are you going to prohibit types of intercourse that every human being, through their fitrah, finds absolutely despicable and disgusting? See, here's the point here. Rationality can only take you so far. And Ibn Taymiyyah says, and he says this very clearly, if you use your rationality in the realm that you're supposed to, it typically does a good job. And even this, he says, it's not infallible. It's not infallible. There are times when your rationality will fail you. Just like your vision will fail you, you think you see something, you're wrong. Your hearing will fail you, you think you hear something, you're wrong. Rationality is a faculty that Allah blessed us with. It's a good faculty if you use it in its proper area. But even in its proper area, sometimes it messes up. Now, if you use it outside of its area, the metaphor that Ibn Taymiyyah gives, if you try to see in the dark, can you see? No. If you try to use your rationality in an area that it's not created for example, the divine, your rationality cannot comprehend the divine. Simple as that. Your finite mind can never understand the infinity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To think that your finite mind is qualified to take on the infinity of Allah is an arrogant presumption, and you shall fail. You're not going to win that because you put your brain in a place it doesn't deserve to be. I.e., you turn the lights off and you thought you could see. You can't see. So, Ibn Taymiyyah's basic point that summarizes my entire 350-page PhD, use your aql, use your brain where it's supposed to be, and you'll typically be more right than wrong. But if you use your aql outside of that region, you're literally like a blind person trying to, like a sighted person trying to see in the dark. You're going to have no idea of what's right and wrong. Does that answer your question?
I mean, it answers many questions.
Okay, but not necessarily your own. Okay.
No, I mean, I think primarily it goes back to the last point you made about Ibn Taymiyyah in putting to practice where you think the right tools, really, using the right tools for the right situation. But I think in terms of like your advice when it comes to someone who is passionate about Western academia, is passionate about continuing their academic studies, but as well they do not want to, they're fearful of maybe losing a part of their identity when it comes to not having their knowledge or understanding as much as they'd hope to, when it comes to the study of Islamic tradition and the Quran and the Hadith. This here, I mean, for me, it's a massive struggle when we have many reformists who use their Western academia and they use that tool or concepts or the mechanisms they have learned throughout the years and then approach and use that when it comes to Islamic tradition. What are the sort of checkpoints? What are the parameters?
Okay, so for me personally, the one red line that I intentionally said I will not cross is the divine origin of the Quran. For me, if we're going to go down that route, then really there's just nothing left of Islam. If you're going to open this door that the Quran might have been tampered with, or some this or that happened, or it's not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then really why remain being a Muslim? There's just nothing left of the tradition then. So for me, that was the red line, the Quran being divine. And of course, this is something that all Muslims agree to, that the Quran is the divine book, and it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it has been preserved. This is something that all Muslim groups agree to. Now when it comes to Islamic law, this is a much more nuanced discussion because it requires a detailed understanding of how law is derived, i.e. usul al-fiqh. It requires a detailed understanding of what parameters of the law allow you to change classical law, and what you have to keep, basically what is immutable and what is mutable. And I think at a very simplistic level, as a general rule of thumb, that which unanimous agreement has occurred over across the traditions of Islam, I think we need to just keep that sacred. Where there's unanimous consensus amongst all of the scholars. In our tradition, when I say our, I mean the Sunni tradition, and of course when it gets to fiqh, you have to go down to traditions because each tradition has its own sources of law. So the Shia have their own sources of law and they have to deal with their sources. In our Sunni tradition, unanimous consensus is an evidence that in fact is more binding than the Quran itself. Why? Because the Quran can be interpreted different ways. So you have a verse, you can interpret it this way, this way, this way. But unanimous consensus is pretty much definitive, right? This is not permissible by unanimous consensus. So this means the Quran has been interpreted in a way that there is unanimity across all of the various strands of Islam. So for me personally, that which is agreed upon unanimously, we need to be very, very, very hesitant to dare challenge it. And if it is challenged, there has to be a reason from within the tradition and not from without the tradition. Because we always have to keep in mind our own subjectivities, our own biases, right? We always have to keep in mind that we have absorbed values from the society we live in. Those values might be incorrect, but we've absorbed them by virtue of the fact we're born and raised in 2017 London, right? Had we been born and raised, and a classic example, by the way, simple example, and I've given an entire lecture about this, and it really shows you how subjectivity changes our understanding of Islam, and we need to be careful about this. Simple example, the very controversial age of Aisha radiallahu anha, okay? The very controversial age of Aisha. According to every single classical historian and seerah and whatnot, our mother Aisha was a young girl when our Prophet married her. Now, the age given would constitute a crime in our times, in our culture, right? In 2017, across the Western world, the age that is mentioned would constitute a crime. Hence, the charge is laid, and I'm not going to use the very vulgar word because it is our Prophet, but the charge is laid that a crime has been committed of a vulgar nature by an older man and a lady that is very young. And that's this charge that is laid against our Prophet. And so many Muslims are just so awkwardly, what do we do now? What do we do now? And so they have magically discovered that the age of Aisha was, subhanAllah, exactly 18, mashallah, tabarakallah, And it's like, honestly, I have to be dismissive. Because 30 years from now, 50 years from now, the age is going to rise to 20, and I guarantee you will find these Islamic scholars miraculously find evidence that her age was 20. You see, this charge that is laid against our Prophet ﷺ is an indictment of our own modernity and its values, and not of the past. For the first 13 centuries of Islam, nobody, Muslim or non-Muslim, considered this to be a problem. All you need to do is to look at Western history and the ages that people used to get married. Forget Islam, forget the Eastern history. All you need to do is look at our own or Western culture. In America, 50 years ago, the age of marriage across the states was around 13 or 12. 100 years ago, even less than this. Okay? Shakespeare, when he wrote his play Romeo and Juliet, the actor that played Romeo was supposed to be 14 years old, and the actress that played Juliet was 13 years old. This is 500 years ago. And a 14-year-old of 500 years ago is essentially like the 22-year-old of today, intellectually as well, by the way. And this is something well documented, not just biologically, intellectually. A 14-year-old back in those days, you know, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, these Ivy League colleges, right? Do you know how old the incoming batch used to be when they were formed in the 1700s? 300 years ago. You were a 12 or 13-year-old young man, and they called them young men, when you started university in the 1700s. Do you guys follow what I'm saying here, right? SubhanAllah, for us to find it awkward and want to have to reform the tradition and be so embarrassed about it. I mean, look at your own kings and queens and how old were they when their marriages were arranged, and how old were they when they even consummated their marriage. It's nothing to be embarrassed about if you only had a little bit of knowledge of history, of anthropology, of the mores of previous societies and cultures. But because we are born in a certain era, and we consider it to be wrong for our year, and guess what? As a Muslim scholar, I have no problem saying, yes, it's wrong for our era. No problem. We can fine-tune fiqh. And we can say that, yes, a girl of that age for our times, she's not suitable to get married to. And we can say, and a society can come together, and groups of ulama can come, and legislation can be passed that, yes, in modern Pakistan, Egypt, whatever, we cannot allow a girl below the age of, whatever they say, 15, 16, to get married. I have no problems with that. Because we're allowed. The Sharia doesn't say it's wajib to get married when you're young. You see what I'm saying? So we can fine-tune. But for us to find the past problematic because of our values demonstrates the speciousness of our own, culture. It demonstrates our inferiority complex. And it demonstrates our lack of awareness of where these trends come from. So this is one example, which is very simplistic. Fact of the matter is, you can go down this route when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to liberalism, when it comes to a host of other issues. When you study where these strands come from and how they originated, okay, fair enough. For us to assume that these values have to be cut and pasted and put onto Islam, it shows our own inferiority complex. Now, that's not to say Islam cannot be fine-tuned. But let's be fair and not say, oh, Islam is liberalism. No, it's not. I mean, let's just say it. It's not. Is it compatible with liberalism? Can you be a Muslim and live in a liberal society? Yes. But Islam is not liberalism. Why should it be? I mean, think about it. Why should it be? Islam has a different trajectory. It has different sources. It has different society. So let's not project our values that we've absorbed from our society onto our religion and our book and our prophet. Let's be critical enough, and this is where I'm different from the traditional ulama. Because traditional ulama would simply say, oh, if the Prophet did it, we can do it as well, and we can marry young, and they have fatwas like this. And I say, no. Usul al-fiqh teaches us, you can fine-tune. I'm not calling for a radical rehaul. I'm not calling for a complete reconstruction. But yes, I understand you cannot marry young anymore. Fully agreed with that. So let's respect the past. Let's understand they were correct for their time and place. And let's say we need to now move on and fine-tune the Sharia because the Sharia allows us to fine-tune that. To me, that is that middle balance that I was referring to.
Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate that. And I think it reflects a lot on the need to study usul al-fiqh. This is very, very important. Looking at the society, social constructs, the way actually we take the process by which we get to a fatwa as well. I mean, quite often when I speak to a lot of brothers and sisters, the ISOC and up and down the country, quite often we want a very, very quick fix. So whenever we have a question about something, it's Islam QA. I'm sure you're familiar with Islam QA. We're all in Islam QA. Quickly, check out the questions here. Does it apply to you?
Biting my tongue. I don't want to say too much about that website.
Let's not go into the bar. It's mindful of bringing it up. But we always look for something where we want a quick solution. And I think part of that is our lack of understanding in terms when it comes to usul al-fiqh, and B, I think very, very important, which goes back to identity really, is the lack of confidence in our deen. And I think we don't really take much pride, the pride in the sense where we are humble enough to understand we need to learn more, we need to revisit our understanding of the deen. And I think I agree with you, and I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the idea of fine-tuning. This is very, very important. When we look at today's society, it's very, very different to the deserts and the camels of 1400 years ago.
It's very different from the society of their own grandmothers and grandfathers. Why are we comparing it to Middle East? Go back to 1917. Look at this society's mores. Look at gender relations in this society 100 years ago. So don't just compare it to the Middle East. You know, I say this in my classes in America all the time to non-Muslims and Shaykh. It's like your own grandmothers and grandfathers would not recognize the America that you're inhabiting. So it's not, this is a, see, we have to be very bold when it comes to taking on these challenges, right? Why do we say, oh, look at us versus them? Look at yourselves versus your own society of the past. Look at how quickly these changes have occurred. And this demonstrates the organic development of ideas that they are comfortable with. They have no problem with it. We have to learn to navigate through while remaining faithful to the tradition and also being law-abiding citizens, because in the end of the day, we understand that we're not going to enforce any of our laws on anybody else. We want to protect our laws in our personal lives, but we also want the freedoms to practice our laws as we see fit, right? And this goes back to liberalism and the notion of individual choice and freedom. Anyway.
I wanted to pick up on something where you're in a position where you're internationally renowned and acclaimed scholar, very active grassroots organizations, very active. I personally noticed your trips to the UK have become more frequent. You're talking a lot more about Islamophobia, your experience in the US, your experience in the UK. We'll go into that in a bit, but before that, I wanted to ask you, how do you manage the difference of opinions, which you have been targeted about certain views or opinions? How do you manage, for instance, understanding the different opinions, but also maintaining the integrity of the message, still being put that across to others?
You clearly have an example in mind. It's too big of a question. Throw out the example and I'll deal with it.
I like that you flipped it back straight at me. For instance, let's talk about the issue of the Sunni and Shia theological debate.
Yes.
I'm not sure if any of you have heard it, but I've watched your Press TV interview. I recommend everyone here to watch it. I think it's very, very important and eloquently put. But I mean, something where you have a lot of content, even in-house Sunni tradition. You know, you come from a background of tradition in Medina, which is a Salafi background. I think we all know. Now we're starting the event, right, guys? We're actually getting to it.
Now I can see. You're warming up physically as well. You're getting excited as well.
But I mean, we all are on a spiritual journey.
Yes.
And this is something we often hold, shuyukh on a pedestal where we think they are cut above everyone else. They're made of a cut of cloth different from everyone else. But we're all on a spiritual journey. We are all changing or maybe fine-tuning, as you said, our views and understanding. And I think, you've obviously spoken about this a lot. But how do you maintain that sort of difference of opinions and still maintaining your integrity?
So I would say this is one of the biggest benefits for me personally of having entered Western academia. The willingness to challenge my tradition respectfully. Because when you're in that phase of your life, whether it's in Deobandi or Salafi or Azhari or whatever, Sunni, Shi'i, and you're surrounded by people of the exact same outlook, and as you yourself said, you aggrandize them, right? You look at them as somehow the embodiments, the inheritors of the Prophet himself. So it becomes impossible to challenge that tradition. Because to challenge that tradition for you psychologically equates to challenging the religion of Islam. The tradition becomes the religion. And this is standard in every seminary, without exception. Not just the Salafis, the Deobandis, but it is every group. Shia, doesn't matter. And what academia does is it forces you to humanize your tradition. It forces you to engage with it and to see the flaws that you knew existed but you just kind of covered up. And that's when I began, see, the difference with me at some stage in Medina, I actually realized I need to go beyond the Medina phase. And I wanted to come to academia willingly. I didn't mention this before, but essentially it came, after you study and you're very inquisitive and you're open-minded, you begin to see the cracks in your own tradition. But your teachers can't answer you because they're within the tradition. So I felt the need to go beyond, and that's why I went willingly. And I went with the mindset, I believe in my religion, I believe in my Lord, I believe in my book, I believe in my Prophet ﷺ. Let's see all they can throw at me, and let's see what happens. Put my trust in Allah and go for it. And it was difficult. I mean, I've mentioned before, it's online, and some people have taken those snippets and obviously smeared me for that, but I don't mind saying this, it is the truth. I went through, I don't call them crises of faith, that's too big of a thing, but crises of identity. Because when I saw clearly the flaws of a tradition that I thought was essentially divine, tradition, not the religion. When I saw the humanity of a tradition that I had given almost divine status to, I didn't know what else to cling on to. I didn't know, because I realized, and this is a little bit deep maybe, so I hope I don't confuse any of you, but inshallah at some level it's very simple. I realized every manifestation of Islam has a human element in it. Whether it's Salafism or Hanafism or Shi'ism or Baribism or Deobandism, the very fact it's an ism shows you what? It is not from Allah and His Messenger directly. That humans have interacted with the divine and the divine text and come forth with various interpretations. Now the problem with the other side of Islam, the progressive or the extremely liberal side, is that this notion then allows them to discard the entirety of tradition. And they then become complete free thinkers, and they say, who cares if everybody says XYZ was haram? I don't care, I can reinterpret the Quran according to my desires. And I knew that's completely fallacious as well for the reasons I just said. So my problem then came to what level I'm willing to engage in reform. And I kind of take solace from one of the wise quotes of the famous boxer Muhammad Ali. And that is that if I'm the same person at the age of 50 as I was at the age of 20, that means I've lost 30 years of my life. I haven't benefited from 30 years of my life. So I'm willing to engage, I'm willing to change my views and mind. I have no problem being critical along with faithful to my tradition. And because of this, my views on many other groups have changed. There's no question when I was in my 20s, what I was taught about Shi'ism was a very, very harsh, vulgar, perception. And I was shown cherry-picked quotations from their books, and I got those books, and I looked up those quotations because I've been told, this is what they say, this is what they say. So I go and look it up. Oh yes, this is what it says here, yeah. But I haven't really interacted with the intellectual tradition of Shi'ism until I got to Yale. Or with Sufism. Again, Medina teaches Sufism in a certain manner. And again, it's not that what they teach is wrong. It's literally what the Islamophobes do to Islam. This is what the Quran says. Kill them wherever you find them. Well, the Quran does say that, right? But what's the context? How do Muslims interpret it? This is what every tradition does to other traditions. It's not just Salafism, by the way. Shias do the same to Sunnis and whatnot. They'll find these juicy quotations and then stereotype an entire tradition. And you learn to realize that's not right. And so in that Press TV interview, the interviewer was very blunt with me and said, you said this when you're 20s, you said this. And I did, you're right, I did say it. And I regret it, I was incorrect when I said it. But still, in the end of the day, after my own research and whatnot, I consider it to be a point of theology that the Quran preaches us to respect those who were closest to our Prophet ﷺ. I consider this to be a point of theology. Given that it is theology, I cannot be sympathetic to claims that they were misguided or wrong, or even worse, they were non-Muslims. And so I disagree with their theology. But what I've also learned is that there's no point dehumanizing them. There's no point preaching hatred of any other group, because it will come back to bite you in the behind. There's no point stigmatizing, because what happens is when preachers and clerics preach hatred, the followers translate that hatred into violence. And all you need to do is to look at Iraq, look at Pakistan, look at areas in the world. Look, whatever you want to say, we should all agree that you shouldn't be bombing each other's places of worship. You shouldn't be killing each other, for disagreements. And I said this on the stage. Look, I disagree. And the guy said, so what's the unity? Don't you want to have Sunni Shia masjid together? I said, I don't see the need for that either. Can't we respectfully, is there only black and white? Can't we respectfully disagree? Can't we just say, okay, you have your interpretation, I have mine, and Allah will judge? I don't have to agree with I don't have to pretend that everything is okay. It's not okay. I strongly disagree with certain tenets of certain movements. Strongly. But that strong disagreement should not translate into hatred, and much less violence. And we should say, okay, you have a tradition, it goes back 1,000 years. It's not as if Shiism is coming from yesterday. I have a tradition, I say it goes back longer than yours, but that's my subjective, biased opinion. Okay, in the end of the day, you have a trajectory, we have a trajectory. We have to learn to get along for the betterment of civil society. And the same goes for other groups and movements as well. So to simplistically answer your question, I am willing to explore. I have no problems engaging with any issue, and if I'm incorrect in this, I will inshallah be man enough to say, I've changed my mind on it. That's exactly what research is supposed to do. Otherwise, you're stagnated, you're ossified. Otherwise, you're refusing to engage with, this is what dogmatism is, right? To refuse to engage with facts when they come to you, and that to me is intellectual arrogance and Islamic arrogance.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very, very good answer, and one which has given us a lot of clarity on. And I think touching upon your personal journey, and as well as many other scholars and people who are students of knowledge as well, who are entering this phase where they are molding still their views. They are still haven't directly have a black and white understanding of the way the world is. And I think very, very important that we look at even just this room here. We have a diverse number of people from across the globe. And I think, we have created you into nations and tribes so that you may get to know one another. But I think the beauty of Islam and the beauty of difference of opinions, and I think here the key word is respect. There is mutual respect in play. And something we firmly believe, unity and diversity. We lived in a much more globalized world and multicultural world. And I think as long as it goes back to the idea of this inferiority complex, of not feeling that we have to be subjected or subjugated or succumbed to a higher authority because out of fear. I think this is very, very important. And that will lead us into, inshallah, our discussion about Islamophobia, about politics, about identity politics as well. Now, one thing I need to mention to you, Shaykh, and I think this is something where I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues about. I've been to America twice. I've been to New York and I've been to San Francisco. And my journeys there were, the American people are much more happier than the Brits here. I don't know if you.
It's the weather. The daily sun dose that you get.
That's true. We're very low in vitamin D.
Yes, we have sunlight every single day of the year, alhamdulillah, so it's the weather. Anyway, so your question is?
No, we quite often when I go and I come back and I actually speak to colleagues there. For example, when I was staying with students in Berkeley, I spoke to them and we had a very long conversation. We actually were talking about identity and being a Muslim in America, whereas being a Muslim in Britain, what is the difference? And if I could succinctly put it in one example, you ask a Muslim in America where are they from, they will say, I'm from Baltimore, or I'm from Michigan, or I'm from Washington. You ask a Muslim here where they're from,
they'll say Mirpur.
Quite often they will not mention Britain, or if anything, most often than not, in my experience, it's London, it's West London, it's South London, or most often the time it's I'm half Moroccan, half Tunisian, or etc., etc. So I felt that Muslims in America were much more comfortable with their identity. They know they are American.
Very true, yes.
Whereas in Britain, we have this dogmatic crisis within our identity. Are we British? Are we not British? What are British values, etc., etc. So,
excellent question. By the way, can I ask you how long has it been last? I'm just curious. What
We're
is
here
it?
for a long time because
Really?
we're trained, yeah. No, I'm
Really?
joking. We're gonna wrap up inshallah by 3 o'clock. We have there's another there's another booking here at 3, so we're aiming to finish just before 3 to allow us to leave and allow the next.
Okay, so I can. So
we'll be taking 2 questions from.
So you're taking questions. Okay. So there's a number of differences between American Islam and British Islam, American Muslims and British Muslims. Where to begin? Number one, the demographics. British Muslims, by and large, a majority of them are Asians, correct? Majority of them came from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, correct? In America, ethnicity, there is no one majority. We have a very diverse. We have African Americans are like 1/4, they're indigenous, quote unquote. And then we have the immigrants, and the immigrants are from countries all over the world. So there's no one dominant ethnicity. Number two, the biggest difference between American Muslims and British Muslims, who came and why did they come? Here in England, by and large, the Muslims that came in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Why? Because this society needed laborers, they needed workers. And so they gave visas to those that are going to work in their factories and places where they didn't have. After World War II, there's a dearth of workers, so they import a certain, if certain economic reasons are needed, and they import a certain class of people to essentially do things that they don't have the manpower to do. Well, and this migration takes place beginning in the late 50s, but peaking in the 70s or so, right? Now in America, there was never a shortage of manual labor. Rather, there was a shortage of engineers, doctors, of intellectual class. So what did they do? They didn't import people from the Middle East or from Arab lands to work. Rather, they only allowed student visas to come. In the 70s and 80s, the main way to come to America was to be a master's or a graduate, an undergraduate or a doctor or an engineer. That's the way you got in. That's the primary visas that were given to Muslims. So automatically what that translates into is that American Muslims, by and large, are upper middle class. Socioeconomically, they are, by and large, of the upper middle class. Education-wise, they are far more likely, 3 times more likely to have a college degree than the average American. So the American Muslim community is socioeconomically upper middle. Educational-wise, again, in the top 5% of America, okay? To give you one example, Muslims are less than 1% of America, but in terms of doctors, they're mashallah 10% of America, okay? 10% of American doctors are from Muslim backgrounds. That automatically shows you which professions and whatnot the Muslims are. Now, if you look at over here, that's not the case. You look at, socioeconomically, generally speaking, Muslims are, I would say, lower middle, right? Educational-wise, generally speaking, they're on average, or maybe even, again, generally speaking. So the dynamics is different. Another point is that the sheer quantity of Muslims here in this land facilitated in something that had its positives and negatives, and that is the geographic ghettoization of the Muslims. You have enclaves of Muslims. I mean, I was in Bradford, right? So like unbelievable last year. Yesterday I was in Birmingham, right? Here in England, in London, you have East London. I mean, you're walking and it's so authentic. You see the pond stains on the street. You can't get more authentic than that. For the non-Asians here, the pond is what anyway. Betelgeuse, whatever, it's like the red stains that come. So the point is that you have these enclaves of Islam that in some ways is good because it preserves identity, but in some ways it's bad because it makes you feel you're not a part of society. Right? In America, that is not, we don't have Muslim majority enclaves. You are with society and you're living with society. So you're talking about this notion of integration. I'm an example of this. I was born and raised in America, and I do not consider myself a Pakistani. I really don't. I consider myself a Pakistani heritage. I love Pakistani cuisine. I speak Urdu fluently. But I do not consider myself a Pakistani. I identify and I feel American. Even in a Trump era, I feel American. This also goes back to another difference between England and America, and that is the social makeup and the realities of the countries. America is an immigrant land. Everybody's an immigrant other than the Native Americans, right? So, and so Trump's mother is from Scotland. His mother came from Scotland. Think about that. Like, everybody is an immigrant. Barack Obama, his father is a Kenyan. Every single American family, everyone without exception, can trace their roots. Whether 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, yes, a small handful, they can trace it to 300 years ago in the 1700s and when they came from England. But still, 1700s, they're coming from England, right? And so, and I say this in when I preach and when I teach in front of non-Muslims, I say, why should there be a claim that somehow I'm any less American because my father landed in Houston, Texas in 1962 and your grandfather landed in Ellis Island in 1932? Because essentially that's what happened. The bulk of Americans, 1920s and 30s, they're landing in Ellis Island, right? So that's one generation difference. I mean, so many of my friends and acquaintances, they know exactly which village in Italy their grandfather came from. They know exactly which pocket of Ireland, because Ireland and Italy were huge migrations in the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s. I was just with a colleague or friend, and he was talking about he visited his second cousins in Italy, and he loved it and whatnot. So this is the land of America. America is a land of immigrants, and we see this with the Trump ban. Look at the protests, look at the placards, look at all of this. Americans understand we are an immigrant society. Well, the brutal fact of the matter is that by and large, your land is not an immigrant society. They have a lot of immigrants to come, but there is a dominant majority that can claim a heritage here that cannot be claimed in America, at least of a few more centuries. So that does change the dynamic. So all of these factors, all of them, socioeconomics, education, the psychology of the people that came, the ghettoization, all of them, they translate into, by and large, British Muslims, I find them, that they have what I call cultural baggage that we don't have in America. You still have this, and also there's, another factor, it translates into religious differences as well. We don't have a problem of sectarianism as much as you do. We don't have two masjids across the street of different ethnicities or different, sects. It doesn't happen that way. We don't have that fanaticism of I'm this and I'm that as much. And we have the flip side, we have far more liberal Islam in America, as you call it, We have that, and that's part of the negatives that come with, with being in America.
Okay. We'll take some questions from the audience. We'll take two questions from the audience and one from those who are following us on Facebook Live. So if we have two hands, yes, one here and one here. So please, if you can just belt it out. We don't have a roving mic, unfortunately, yet.
My name is Elizabeth. I'm one of the staff members at the Development Studies Department here. And one of the things that I find fascinating, just on your last point of, the comparison between the British Muslims and the American Muslims. Before I transitioned into academia, I was actually working as a journalist for the Voice of America. So I was stationed in DC for about 3 years. And before and after that, I was with the BBC here in London. What I find to be a sort of negative in terms of integration when you're living in the US is that there's more institutional racism in terms of trying to rise up the ranks and work a lot longer. Therefore, you have less ability to build social capital that I find here. Here, it was much more easier to navigate. Once you're integrated into mainstream society, like when you've come out of those enclaves you described. I come from Leicester. I'm from a Somali background, and there's about 15,000 of us in Leicester, and we predominantly live in 2 areas of Leicester. So there's definitely that barrier of being stuck in the enclaves. But once you get out of it, what I found was that you have more freedom to climb up the ladder. I'm 33. I've already got 15 years in the industry. I've got a PhD. I've got a job in the Development Studies Department. So for me, it's difficult to have that same trajectory in America, which is why I came back. What do you make of that?
I actually agree with you. There is to some level, but I like what you said, institutional racism. not street racism.
No.
Dare I say, perhaps street racism is worse in Europe than in America. That's my sentiment. I don't know if any studies or surveys have been done, but generally speaking, you're not going to find that type of in-your-face racism. You know, the P word that is common here was never used, you know. The N word is taboo now completely, you know. But you're right, there is this institutional racism that, you know, everybody's commenting on. I mean, as you know this, especially after Barack Obama's election, where people said racism is over, everybody said, no, it's not. You know, as Travis Smiley very profoundly remarked, if Barack Obama has to jump, you know, 6 steps to do what, you know, a white person has to do 1 step, that is racism. You know, it doesn't matter. The point is, even if he got there, what he had to do to get there is not what anybody else had to do. I agree with you to that level. Let me just semi-defend it by saying, well, that's one of the reasons is because your sheer quantities make institutional racism difficult. I mean, is it true that in Bradford and Birmingham, like 30-40% of the population is Muslim, right? Something like some astronomical number like that, right? I mean, that's what somebody told me yesterday, I don't know. But whatever it is, even if it's 20%, how can you discriminate against 20% of your population? It's not possible to institutionally discriminate against them. Whereas in America, Muslims are less than 1%. Okay? And that's an advantage you guys have. In England, you're probably 5, I would say 6%. In London, you're probably 15%, 10-15%. Okay? And in Bradford and Birmingham, you're double that number, to 30% or 25%. That is an advantage that needs to be taken, you know, taken advantage of. Your demographics come into play when it comes to social identity, cohesion, when it comes to race politics, when it comes to influencing politicians. I mean, how can a city of 30% Muslims not be involved with the political process? It's sad. It's a blessing given to you that you're turning away from. And I'm talking about you, I'm talking about the Muslims of England, right? But because of that, what you said is absolutely correct. I mean, the sheer quantity of beards and hijabs I'm going to see on London's underground, right? You're not going to see anything like that in America. So it does become difficult to have that institutionalized racism. And I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. I cannot defend it. It's a perk that comes with being statistically so numerous in a society as well. The other question was what?
I wrote the question down.
No problem.
So with most Muslims accessing information about their religion in terms of advice on the internet, the number is growing. And most of the resources out there, like Islamic Q&A, are more skewed towards more certain traditions. Has there been any efforts, like contemporary modern Western scholars with you, Suleiman, Web, etc., to establish an online platform where the individual questions and answers you may give talks where people rush after you to answer those questions, where they can collate that in an online resource. So it's to the benefit of those that might not have access to you directly, and they might want non-skewed or non-biased info, like what's not really out there.
So the brother's asking that do some of the more modern Western scholars have websites similar to the Fatawa websites where we can produce our scholars for the Western audience, our fatwas for the Western audience. Actually, believe it or not, we are working on that right now, alhamdulillah. When I say by we, I mean Al-Maghrib Institute, because we're an institute, so we have, you know, we have the means to do that. So all of us are actually working on exactly this project, to have a website, and I can't give too much away because it's going to be announced soon, but it's going to be an interactive website that will have modern fatwa dealing, and we're going to collect questions from the people. So again, it's going to be a very relevant, it's not going to be stuff that is irrelevant, and inshallah, you know, just keep following our Facebook and Twitters, and inshallah there will be some good news soon, inshallah, because we all felt the need. We all felt the need. You're correct. The standard websites don't take our context into account, you know, and it is very frustrating for me to read some of these fatwa. I want to sometimes scream with frustration. I know of cases where new converts have left Islam because when they read these fatwa, they said, I can't live up to this, and they left Islam. Absolutely. And the people giving them, they're good intention, but they're not living amongst us. and they're reading their fatwa from theoretical books and they're applying it, and they make Islam into an unlivable religion. And Islam is not supposed to be so obscure and abstract and difficult that you cannot live it in a daily life. So we are very eager to start exactly such a project. And inshallah, we are working on it literally. The project is already in place, and the announcement will come soon. But then it will take a while to develop a database, obviously, right? To develop the questions, it's going to take years and years and years. But we are starting, and we're launching an online portal where all of us will have exactly what you're talking about, inshallah.
Just a reminder for those who are following us on Facebook Live, there's hashtag YQ at SOAS for any of your questions to come through. For those who are not with us here today or not in London, who are joining us live streaming. One question which you can actually add maybe to this bank of new questions on your database, which has come from online, is the issue of mixed gender interactions. So, there's a few people scoffing, I don't know why. It's a real issue, right? So, and it was here it's specificity to university engagement, but I think we could also talk about wider society as well and work perhaps. But yes, Shaykh, I mean, what's your opinion on this?
So again, before we talk about Islam and its rules, do realize that gender interactions in the West have evolved radically over the last 100 years. I mean, before we think about the West or the East or the Islam, go do your research about how men and women interacted in this very land. For the longest time, there were certain etiquettes and protocols that were understood. And again, I mean, sometimes even if you look at the shows that come out, and they just have, what is it, that show that has the famous castle here? What is it called? The famous BBC show that went viral in America. Downton Abbey, yes. So look at that and see how women are interacting with men and whatnot. I mean, it's, all of you are college students. I can be frank here. Just the notion of premarital intercourse. It was unheard of in the middle and upper class, even 100 years ago. I mean, you just don't do it. And if you do it, it's something that is, shameful, secret, don't tell anybody, whatnot. Now you fast forward and you look at modern society. So before anybody says, oh, Islam versus the West, I said, look at the West versus the West. Like I said, contextualize. 50 years ago in America, I mean, I don't know English culture that well. 50 years ago in America, 60s, even 1960s, it was something that was taboo. There was haya, there was modesty. It was not something that was common at all. All of this changed in the hippie revolution of the 70s. That's when, what hit the fan. That's when everything just became, free love and whatnot. Everything changed. So for us to consider Islam somehow backward or abnormal, subhanAllah, every society in the world had similar norms up until one generation ago. If you look at modern entertainment, modern television, I mean, we are desensitized to it because we've grown up in it. Well, frankly, even me growing up in the 80s, the shows in the 80s were so much more different and, cleaner and whatnot than the shows right now. I mean, it's amazing to see in one generation the change that has taken place. I mean, if you look at even the 40s and 50s, you've all heard of the famous show, I Love Lucy. You know that show? I Love Lucy? I Love Lucy was the most watched show in America in the 50s. Okay, I just want to give you one example to show how times have changed. Lucille Ball, the one who played Lucy, Lucille Ball, her co-actor was a Puerto Rican by the name of Ricky Ricardo, okay? Now, when they started the show, Ricky and Lucy were just actors. They fell in love and they got married in real life, okay? So they became an actual couple in real legal life. And the show demonstrated that and whatnot. Now, so they're actually married. Look at that show, I Love Lucy. Whenever they show Lucy and Ricky at night in bed, and they're legally married, if you look at it, the two beds are on other sides of the room. And Lucy is dressed essentially in like a burqa almost. Complete. She's even wearing a hijab, a night scarf, okay? And something happens at night and they wake up and she wakes up there and he wakes up there. They're not even showing. Now, what am I talking about here? In the 1950s, television felt awkward to show a legally married man and woman lying fully clothed together in the same bed under a duvet. Think about that. People who watch that show are still alive right now when it came out, 1950s. People, now you look at what is on television, much less what is on satellite and whatnot, it is pornography. It really is. I mean, there's no other way to say this. It is soft porn. Look in one generation how the norms are changing. So before anybody criticizes Islam and says, oh, look at this own society and what has happened in one generation. And like I said, contextualize. Don't have an inferiority complex. Be brave and do your research. Now, in any case, the point is we have to fine-tune. We do have to fine-tune. In some societies, there's complete gender segregation. See, here's the point. I don't make fun of those societies. I don't. There was an equivalent of gender segregation even in this society. Maybe not as strict, but yes. You know, in college classrooms at one point in time, men sat in one place, women in this very land. In America, in fact, in America, up until recently, women did not go to the same universities as men. I don't know when they were allowed here in England, but this was a part of the feminist revolution, a part of, the first and second wave feminism. Again, do your history. When was the first batch of graduates from Oxford and Cambridge Imperial? I don't know. Yale and Harvard, the most prestigious universities in America, right? Do you know the first batch of women that got accepted to Yale was what year? Can you guess? Anybody just guess? Exactly, 1969. 1969. Now think about that. Is anybody here from that old that were actually at that time? But 69 is the age of my parents. That's one generation ago. Women were allowed entrance to Yale. Think about the implications of how quickly society, because they did not, and I know this very well because I lived at Yale, they were hesitant to allow women primarily because of intercourse, primarily because what's going to happen when women are going to be having dorms as men. And so they had strict segregation laws, right? This building will be for women and only for women. No man can come in. And this building, and there's strict laws, by 7 p.m. the women have to be back in. This is in the 70s. I was born in the 70s. That's how society has changed. And now you look at it, and at Yale, forget segregation of the building. It is possible that you share bathrooms and you're a different gender. Like there's complete now, there is no segregation. You can, in the same room, you have to be the one gender, right? But what happens is you have one room men, one room women, and the bathroom is in the middle, so you share the same bathroom, for example. That's how it has become. There's no sense, so this is in one generation. So don't be surprised that Islam has its morality and its virtue. Islam has its way. Now, we can find too. In Saudi Arabia, there's complete gender segregation. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 10 years, okay? You walk into a bank, it's all men. If you're a woman, you're going to go to the women's section. You walk into a restaurant, schools, complete gender segregation. Okay, I'm not making fun of it, I'm not criticizing it. That's their culture. But is it a requirement of Islam? No, it's not. No, it's not. You don't have to be segregated to that level. And it is permissible to interact with the opposite gender. We learn from the seerah, our Prophet would say salam to groups of women. Men and women recognized one another, knew one another. They would speak formally to one another. So it's not a problem to do that, but we have our rules and laws, and our etiquettes would say that any interaction with the opposite gender should be with decency, with dignity. Okay? It should not cross beyond the lines. If feelings begin to develop, then people need to understand these feelings are only legitimately, fully manifested in marriage. And so if marriage is a viable option, then it is possible for more conversation to occur with the express and verbal intention on both sides that we're aiming for something halal, and we will do that which is permissible, which is to talk and engage in whatnot until the halal is done. Otherwise, we all understand that it is not healthy to engage with the opposite gender beyond the norms of decency and civility, because essentially you're playing with fire. Essentially, you're gonna end up doing something that is not permissible in our Sharia. Now, we also have a problem of the ultra-fundamentalist side. We also have this strict gender segregation within the ISOCs, within the Islamic societies, that is also unhealthy. And I'm sorry to be so explicit, but again, you asked me the question, you're going to hear my answers. I don't beat around the bush. We have a serious problem. I don't know about your ISOC, I'm visiting for the first time, but I was a member of my MSA. MSAs were ISOCs, and I know in other ISOCs, the segregation policy is so strict that men and women have no interaction with one another whatsoever. And this is also a problem. Why? Because as a part of training, you need to teach your young men and women how to be decent and dignified with the opposite gender. This is essential as well. Otherwise, what happens is you don't know how to deal with a sister. A brother doesn't, or a sister doesn't deal with a brother. What happens is, astaghfirullah, you fetishize any interaction, such that if a brother passes a sister in the hall and says, Assalamu alaikum, the sister says, was that a hidden proposal? Is he interested in marrying me? Whatnot? That's a problem. It gets to the problem where you can't interact with one another in a dignified and decent manner. And this is not correct, because every one of us here, without exception, interacts with the opposite gender outside of our faith, and we know the boundaries and limits. If you meet a colleague, if you meet a friend of the opposite gender, and you want to just ask, how was the class, how was your exam? You don't need to be taught how to be decent. It's a part of you. You don't need to be taught how to flirt. You know when you're flirting. Right? So in the Sharia, we are told it is permissible to be decent and dignified with the opposite gender, but don't cross into flirtation. And if those feelings begin to develop, you had better make sure that there's a halal, end goal. If not, then it is safer for the best of you to physically not really interact, because at the end of the day, you don't fuel fire with throwing gasoline on it, right? Feelings are forgiven, but actions are not. So we are people of culture and dignity and decency and nobility. We are people who consider marriage to be sacred and consider manifestations of romance and love to only flourish within the confines of marriage. This is our religion. We embrace sexuality within marriage. We embrace romance within marriage. Before that, we consider it to be something that harms our soul and disrupts society. So we engage with the opposite gender where we need to, when we need to, with dignity, but we do not cross the red lines that will lead to that which is harm. It's as simple as that.
Okay, fantastic. On the record, I need to actually say that the ISOC here is extremely, very, very... I have to, I'm sorry, I've been told. The ISOC here, you'd be very fond of them, to put it short. They don't have a strict...
Healthy interactions are necessary.
No, and I think it's very, very interesting actually. I was speaking to some of the brothers on this. I think there was a very, very interesting khutbah which I liked here at SOAS a couple of weeks ago, which talked about this. And it's interesting when you meet a non-Muslim woman, you're like, oh, hi, how are you doing? What do you have for breakfast? And so it's really normal. When you see a hijab, a sister, you're like, assalamu alaikum, you're like,
no, you don't even say salam. You're like, okay, I didn't see her, I don't know what she is. You have to look around as if she's invisible. It's crazy. And I have to say one thing. In this Islamophobic climate that we live in, I want my sisters to know that I acknowledge their presence, and I acknowledge their femininity, and I acknowledge their hijab, and I acknowledge their Islam. I want her to know I am here for you. Anything happens, don't worry, we're in the same vicinity. I mean, can't we learn to say salam without having a hidden flirtatious message in the middle of it? I mean, really, it is a problem. That's why I said it, I'm sorry to be blunt, but what happens is, if you do not interact with the opposite gender within your faith, then any interaction is sexualized and fetishized. And this is a psychological problem that we have to overcome. And that's where the healthy balance is, that no, I need to teach my son how to respect a hijabi. I need to teach my daughter that the brothers around her are Muslim men that she can interact with in a noble manner. If I don't do that, I failed as a father, and I haven't equipped her to deal with the society that she lives in. So therefore, I am very clear about my position. We need to have this healthy middle balance. And unfortunately, some ISOCs go to extremes where the socialization really becomes beyond normal. And that's not acceptable. you know, there should be a healthy, not a physical boundary, but a mental boundary, and at some level physical. So if the meetings are held together, there should be a natural, organic men on one side, women on one side. It doesn't have to be a barrier, it doesn't have to be a sign, men here, women here. It should be a natural understanding. And when they need to interact together, they can sit here and there and interact together like that. There's no need to be, you know, beyond the bounds of the Sharia, is what I'm saying.
Okay, terrific. We'll take a couple more questions here. Before that, if we can have hands so I know who to go to. One here and one at the far left there. And then we'll do another round, inshallah. I've had three questions. I'm going to put them into one question because they're all talking about the perception of Muslims in Europe and the UK. And I think we can expand that to perception of Muslims in the West now. And the negative stereotype of Muslims. This is the one angle. Who is fueling this negative stereotype? The second part of that question is looking internally. Why is it that Muslims aren't doing enough, or not doing much in terms of activism when it comes to changing that perception, changing that stereotype, and actually reinforcing a positive imagery and a positive understanding of what Islam is?
Sorry, can I just add to that? Also, with that stereotype comes the creation of identity, especially for our younger generation. So the fear articulated of Muslims as a response, younger generation are responding and acting very different than what I was in my generation did when we were trying to practice Islam. So it's actually creating a different identity as a Muslim for the younger generation.
So the gentleman, so just to, for those who haven't picked it up or who are following us, the gentleman is mentioning also the intergenerational response to such a problem, how it's different within the younger generation and the older generation.
So Islamophobia, it's a very complex issue. It's actually an academic discipline now. It's actually an industry now. There's a book called Islamophobia Industry. Who is fueling it? It's not just one entity. It's not just a conspiratorial theory that there's conspiracy that, no. Reality is there are a number of factors here. There is this psychological factor of the fear of the unknown that the broader public in American England has. And that's at some level understandable, okay? There is a psychological fear of the other. There is the stigmatization of that which you don't know. They see what's happening in the media, they see the sensationalist news, they see the beheadings and the bombings and 7/7 and 9/11, and you know, at some level it is understandable. Put yourselves in their shoes, okay? They don't know our faith, they don't know who we are, and they see these people born and bred here, and they're just, you know, blowing up buildings and whatnot. It's understandable, they get terrified. Where are these people coming from? Maybe all of them are somewhat similar. So at some level, there is a bit of genuine, understandable psychology, okay? There's also a sinister component as well. And that sinister component is that it helps certain political powers to fuel that hatred. It helps certain agendas to exacerbate that tension, right? And that tension is exacerbated by politicians and media pundits and pseudo-philosophers and basically social thinkers, okay? Some of them, it is their agenda, they get paid for it. We know this because in America, at least, I cannot talk about England, in America at least a very amazing survey was done. It's online. I want all of you who are interested to read this. It's called Fear Incorporated. Just Google Fear Inc. PDF. Fear Incorporated PDF. And you'll come across a academic study done by a think tank in California that studied who is financing the Islamophobia industry. And what, because it is being financed, there are advertisements being placed, free CDs being handed out, the threat of radical Islam, okay? There are people, and what we discovered, it wasn't Muslims who did the survey, but it was non-Muslims, but there was, obviously it helped us. What we discovered in our case, I don't know if your British case as well, in our case, believe it or not, certain factors of the Republican Party, that we call the Tea Party folk, you know, the radical wing of the Republican Party, there were a bunch of multi-millionaires and billionaires who were financing the production of these videos, the placement of these ads, the placement of certain people on television shows in order to amplify the message of us versus them. And why were they doing it? because it was linked to trying to discredit Barack Obama and the Democratic Party as being too soft on terrorism. Essentially, what they have to do is to create a bogeyman, to create a gorilla, a monster, to create a monster so that they can then say, we are the damsel in distress, okay? We are the people that need to be saved, and the current government is not saving us. This is in America, I don't know about your state. The current government is not saving us. The Democratic Party, now they even accuse it of being, they accused Obama of being a secret Muslim. They accused him of being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, right? They accused him, now even if mainstream Republicans did not do that, mainstream Republicans, all of them said that he is soft on terror. He's soft, and that's why Trump is doing what he's doing, right? So they said he's soft on terror. So by exaggerating the threat of terror, they were able to say, what is he actually doing? Nothing. Then the Democratic Party comes as the knight in shining armor to rescue the damsel in distress. Okay? It's a sinister political game that worked. We see this. It worked. So they created a bogeyman. They exacerbated the problem. We all agree there's a problem. I mean, Muslims, let's be fair here. Yes, 0.0001% of us are inclined towards those weird ideas. They might be 0.001%, but at the end of the day, they're there, right? The 7/7 bombers, they were Muslims born and raised here. Let's be fair. Let's be honest. So they do exist. Yes, the threat is exaggerated. Yes, it's not mainstream Islam, but they're there. So these outsiders come along and they exaggerate this threat for sinister political reasons, okay? And you also have outright racists who know they're racist, but can no longer speak in the language of racism. They cannot say those brown folks, those Asians, those P words. They can't use that anymore because it's politically incorrect. So what do? They latch on to this issue of, their values are different than ours. Their theology is different. Because that is somewhat politically acceptable to say. You're not going to be labeled a racist if you criticize the teachings of Islam as of yet, right? That's you can get away with it. But at heart, these are racist. And they're simply expressing their racist sentiment in a language that is politically acceptable in our times. So you have that as well. And then, of course, obviously, you do have political and economic interests. We can get really controversial and mention global interests as well. And I don't want to go too deep here, but simply point out that it helps finance economies when you go to war. And it helps dehumanizing the other to sell the war to your population. Let's just leave it at that, and I don't want to go more deeper because
that's a topic which we love here at SOAS. We talk about all of these things. So
okay, so your professors will take over where I'm not allowed to take over for my own safety and your whatnot. So it's something well known in this regard. Okay.
There's a small, where do Muslims come here in terms of our activism? How do we respond?
Excellent. So one of the biggest perks that you guys have, I mentioned this before, is your percentages and quantities. We in America would love to have the percentages you have here. We envy you for the fact that your mayor is Muslim. For the fact that it's like, look, Islam is everywhere. The presence of Islam is clearly seen, but sadly it is not felt. What do I mean by this? You see Muslims, you see the halal signs everywhere, you see the beards and niqabs, but allow me to be a little bit frank because political correctness, we don't have time for it. Where do you see the religion of Islam if you are a non-Muslim? Where do you see the effects of Islam in your society? Do you understand the question here? You see, our Prophet ﷺ, it's very clear, and this isn't some revisionism, this isn't some ahistoric, it's very clear. And I have studied the seerah extensively. It is one of my specialities. I've read almost all the classical books. I have analyzed, I have thought years about the seerah. If you look at the life of our Prophet ﷺ, there is no question that at the forefront, our Prophet ﷺ was first what we would call a social activist, a social worker, what we would call. For the first 40 years of his life, what did he do? There was no Quran for the first 40 years revealed. There was no kalima that he taught for the first 40 years, right? What did he do for the first 40 years of his life? Think about it. He was known as what? The trustworthy, the honest. He was known as the most generous, the most kind. He was known as the one who would feed the orphan, shelter the one who's traveling in the city, who would, and that's why when the incident happened in the Kaaba, and he walked in, and to solve that incident, every tribe said, oh, he's going to solve our problem, he's the best amongst us. Now, how did he earn that reputation? By preaching Islam, by handing pamphlets on the street, by knocking on doors and saying, come pray in the masjid? There was none of that to do. How did he earn that respect amongst his people? By essentially being what we would call a social activist. A compassionate, caring social worker. And I've given entire lectures about this, I don't want to go over all of it here, but it is sad to point out that we have taken Islam to mean only rituals. Not that rituals are not a part of Islam. Please don't misquote me and then tweet and making fun of rituals. No. But that Islam is more than just rituals. Islam is more than just your looks and your beard and your hijab. Islam is more than just, how often you go to the masjid, or it's also about your role in society. Our Prophet ﷺ was known as the most compassionate, the most generous. He was known as somebody whom you could go to share a meal with. If you were hungry, you would go to, this is what he was known for. Now, what have we done when it comes to social work here in this land? I'm happy with your Ramadan tent project, but I dare say it is the exception and not the norm when it comes to Islamic groups. Most of the time, and we see this, whenever we try to, in America, let me say, when I travel to raise funds for any cause that's overseas, any, Syrian issue, we should raise funds for Syria, of course we should. When I raise funds for Kashmir, for Palestine, we American Muslims are wealthy, mashallah, tabarakallah. The money starts pouring in, 100,000, 500,000. I have raised, at occasions, 1 million for catastrophes overseas. Now, you come to the same communities and you try to raise for a local soup kitchen. Wallahi, you will struggle to get $10,000. For some reason, excuse my bluntness here, overseas causes are sexy and domestic causes are boring. And that's wrong. Our mentalities are somehow messed up here. Not that we shouldn't give to overseas, of course we give to the Syrian refugees, but why can't we also give to local causes? Why aren't we at the forefront for issues in our own communities? And it's not just charity, by the way, it's not just charity. Our Prophet ﷺ participated in a treaty called Hilf al-Fudul. Go look it up. It's a social treaty. It's an economic justice treaty. When people were discriminated against, when a poor person was taken advantage of, he, along with the elders of the Quraysh, got together and said, and this was pre-Islam, and he said, no, we're not going to allow discrimination. Muslims need to be at the forefront of speaking up on behalf of the oppressed, of fighting bigotry and racism, of giving a voice to those who have no voice. They need to take leadership and ownership when it comes to anti-racism, anti-bigotry, when it comes to any social cause. It's not just an Islamic problem. Hunger. I don't know, want to get too controversial. What's happening with your NHS? It's not just a social issue. Muslims need to take ownership. Just imagine, brothers and sisters, just imagine if there was a figure, a leader, who took on the popular voice and challenged whatever it is, whether it's the NHS and whatnot. And Brother Ahmed with his big beard is coming, and he's not saying Bismillah, Alhamdulillah. No, he is taking on. It's not fair. It's not right. We are all, whatever the case might be, and we deserve whatever the case might be. Whatever, you get my point. He takes on a leadership role, and he speaks on behalf of a human cause, which is an Islamic cause. You understand my point here? This is where we are lacking. You don't find that voice. Because for some reason, as you yourself said, and it's not just you. Here, Muslims in America still have some to do. They're not as behind, but still. Here, for some reason, there is an us versus them. That's their problem. No, hunger is not their problem. It's our problem. Social issues, racism, bigotry, economic disparity, that's not their problem. It is our problem. And in my humble opinion, this is where Muslims have fallen miserably short. They have taken a complete backseat, and because of this, we are viewed as the other, and rightfully so. You don't take ownership of any of the problems that all of us are affected by. And I feel this is where, it's so important that we understand Islam is not just theology and rituals. Islam is about social activism and change. Islam is about giving, and this isn't some romanticized rereading of the seerah. As I said, go look at the seerah. Go look at what our Prophet did. It's a whole package deal, and the theology and the rituals are one component of that package. We have concentrated on that one part and neglected the social activism part. And I feel if we simply did this, honestly, you cannot hate a society or a religion that is known for feeding the hungry. It's as simple as that. To be very, very blunt, if we were known to feed the hungry, and that was our hallmark, there would be no Islamophobia. Simple as that. But we're not known for that, even though we should be. We're not known for that. We're known for whatever we're known for. And because we haven't followed the footsteps of our Prophet ﷺ, when stereotypes were propagated, it's easy for people to believe in them. Why? Because we live isolationist lives from the community. We don't interact with our broader society. We have these invisible barriers that we've built, and it's just me, my masjid, my community, and that's it. And there's nothing else to do with the broader society. And that's why it is so important that every Islamic group, every ISOC, every community has programs that are intentionally giving back to the very place you are physically inhabiting. This is not PR da'wah. This is Islam. Feeding the hungry isn't PR. It is Islam. Even our psyche has to be changed. It's not something we do for the Kodak moment. It's like, oh, we want to feed so that somebody takes the picture so that we... No. Feeding the hungry is what we do as Muslims because Allah wanted us to do it. And if we have that attitude, wallahi, Islamophobia would not flourish. It cannot flourish. You cannot hate somebody who's so loving and kind to you. And that's why whatever they could say about our Prophet, whatever they could say, they said the worst things. He's a madman, he's crazy, he's possessed, but they could not say, who are you? We've never seen you. You don't care about us. Think about that. They could not say, you are the other. They couldn't say that. Because it's clear that nobody cared more for them and loved them, and nobody more than our Prophet. We haven't followed his sunnah. Don't be surprised they're going to buy the Islamophobia against us.
Thank you very much, Shaykh. Sister here, please, and then we come down to the brother.
And then we finish, inshallah.
And then we will...
Wrap
We're
up,
all done. I'm sorry, if anyone had any questions, I'm really, really sorry, but we're very tight on time, so we'll end up with these two questions here.
And I'm also very hungry, so two things.
Half a chicken?
No. Fish and chips! I'm in your land.
Please, sister.
Sorry to check as that's our time. I just wanted to ask, following on this point of activism, there is a very real risk that by going down the activism route blindly, that we embrace a language and a methodology that is not actually from us. And there is a very real danger that we then fall into the same trap that we described at the beginning of the talk, which is then projecting things which don't belong to our tradition onto it. How do we balance between that, especially in a place like SOAS?
Excellent question, and I completely agree with you. If we dive into activism, it is possible that our activism will be shaped by the contours of modernity. And we will take on causes that are maybe vaguely related to our values, or maybe even in contradiction to our values. And that is a reality that we are seeing right now. And we have to be very cognizant of this. I mean, there are so many examples that come to mind, but in the end of the day, every one of us has to see the projects or the causes that I'm championing, are they in conformity with my faith tradition? And the examples they give are obviously, they all are. Some of them we can say, okay, they're Islamic, they might not be the most important priority, but they're permissible and it's okay, and that's fine. For example, being green, going green, okay? I have no problem, and I actually endorse the Green Society of America, the Muslim Green Society of America. They have one like that, right? So
Did you say Islamic?
Muslim Green Society, something like this. I forgot the name, but they actually have this, right? And so, they met me in an interview in a convention. They said, "Shaykh, we need a video clip to endorse us." And I looked at the brochures and pamphlets, and I said, "Be careful, you don't take this to an un-Islamic level." Okay, let me give you a simple example. If you personally choose not to eat meat, that's your loss, not my loss. That's your business, and that's fine. You can be a vegan, but the minute you say it's unethical to eat meat, and it's haram to eat meat, and it's disgusting to eat meat, you have encroached on a value that is our faith tradition. Personal choice to be vegan, that's up to you. It's your loss, but it's up to you. Okay? No, it's not a game. Well, it's a weight gain for me if I eat meat, but look, man, I'm definitely a Pakistani by heart. If there's no meat on the dinner table, there's no dinner on the dinner table. Very clear about that. But if you don't want to eat meat, it's not wajib to eat meat. Go ahead, don't eat meat. And if you want to be a vegan, as your personal lifestyle, be a vegan. But if you're going to get caught up with the contours of modernity, and you get caught up with the vegan movement and say, oh, it's unethical to eat animals, and it's so un-Islamic, and there are people that are arguing that it's haram to eat animals. And we say, you are a perfect example of somebody who has absorbed values and projected them onto the tradition. You can fine-tune your personal life and say, I don't want to eat meat. Good for you, or bad for you, but anyway, it's your business. I'm making fun of it, but really, to be fair, it's up to you. But do not project that activism onto Islam. I'm giving a simple example here, okay? However, going green and taking care of the environment, okay, I'll be honest with you. I personally don't view it as the most pressing thing that we as a community have to deal with. But, and I'll be honest, I'm very happy if some Muslims jump on that activism platform and become very involved. Because it is Islamic. Let's conserve water, let's conserve energy, let's mind the environment. In the grand scale of things, we kind of sort of have to protect our lives right now because of Islamophobia, but still, okay, let's protect other things as well and throw paper bags in the paper plates and the plastic bag. Excellent, alhamdulillah. I'm very happy that Muslims get involved in that as well. Because it's Islamic in the end of the day. It's to conserve energy. It might not be the priority, but it's good. So you're absolutely right. How do we navigate? It's very simple, and that is through Islamic scholarship being reference points for us. Making sure that what we're doing is within the confines of Islam. And there are very controversial areas, let's not get into them in this lecture, but still, every one of you who is involved in activism needs to have a background in Islamic knowledge. If you don't, make sure you have a frame of reference and an authority you can ask. Because in the end of the day, that is what Islamic scholarship is for, to guide you in these areas. And inshallah, you will find ulama and Islamically trained people that, inshallah, are forward-thinking and are able to cater to these situations and needs, inshallah.
Very, very, very quickly, last question.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm a researcher at the University of Oxford and also a senior teaching fellow here at SOAS. My question relates or pertains to a few of the topics from your Dow chemical experience to Amar's point on inferiority complexes, to the socioeconomic superiority of the US to the UK and so on. The question really refers to the title here, Challenges and Solutions in the 21st Century. I'd love to get your insights for the many brothers and sisters and colleagues here on trials and tribulations and compromise in the workplace and in that path to graduation. Many of the colleagues are now preparing their references, etc., for jobs, graduate schemes. You also refer to wealth creation and creating value for the community. The problem for many of these colleagues, they may be going into jobs or career paths that involve, perhaps not directly, but perhaps a research assistant in perhaps a Goldman Sachs, which might be a riba life. Also the point on gender segregation, which we dovetail. For some people that's necessary, for some that's not. Going to the pub to advance career development and career planning. I'd like to get your thoughts on these sorts of issues, which are problems for many of these colleagues, both when they reach the workplace and go from being, like you said, segregated in those corridors to doing things that they didn't think they'd end up doing in the workplace. So maybe some thoughts on that, and maybe some advice on guidance.
Jazakallah khair, your question is very pertinent. Unfortunately, it can't be answered in 2 minutes. But let me just say, every issue that you raised, I have given detailed, fatwas and guidance in the classes that I give. In fact, I teach a class for my institute, the Ronald Institute, which is essentially the fiqh of living, the fiqh of daily life. And we're also going to teach a class that is essentially the fiqh of corporate America. And we're going to try and teach it for you guys as well. So indeed, you raised a lot of questions. And for those of you that are still in uni, it's very easy to be idealistic. It's very easy to grow your beard full and to not shake hands with the opposite gender. And it's manageable to keep those norms. As those of you who have worked in the corporate world know, those ideals are almost impossible to maintain in the real world. And if you insist on maintaining them, they will come at a sacrifice and a cost. So, for this, you need to find your frame of reference and your shaykh and your alim that you trust. Somebody who's not a fundamentalist and somebody who's not an outright liberal. Because this is the problem we have, okay? For some people, everything becomes haram. For other people, there is no such thing as haram. And it's a problem we have. We have these two extremes. Unfortunately, we have a preponderance of them. Find somebody who, inshallah ta'ala, is somebody faithful to tradition, yet understands the problem of modernity. And I realize there are not that many amongst them, but still they're there. Still they're there. I have my personal views, but at the end of the day, my views are my opinions. I could be right, I could be wrong. This is ijtihad that I have done, and I have done my research, and I feel comfortable telling you my positions about every one of these issues. But some of you will not agree with that, that's fine. You need to find the shaykh you agree with, that's the point. You need to find your frame of reference. I mean, I believe that you cannot compromise on some issues. On other issues, it's a gray area. And on other issues, it's clear-cut halal, and some of our scholars were too strict in the first place. I mean, obviously, I think nobody here believes that wearing a suit and tie is haram. There are fatwas that says haram to wear a suit and tie. There are fatwas. In fact, I think Islam Q&A even have, I'm not sure. But there are fatwas that say it's haram to wear a tie because of this and that. I mean, really, what can I say? It's just that obviously it's not the case, I mean, I know that website said it's haram to wear a trouser below the ankle. Okay? It clearly says this. Okay, walk into work with your trousers cut above the ankle. There's nothing haram about this, absolutely nothing. And I have researched this issue and other issues to the best of my human ability, and I have no problem saying, I dress in a suit and tie, I dress in a sports jacket and a fancy trousers when I teach. I don't dress in kurta and shalab kameez. I don't have a turban when I walk into my university campus. And I dress up. I mean, I spend money on my clothes. Why? Because I expect the people, they know I'm a religious cleric. And I want to show them that I'm a dignified person. I quote from the seerah, our Prophet ﷺ, when a delegation would come, he would dress in a Yemeni cloak. This is what the hadith tells us. Who told him that a Yemeni cloak is dressing up? That was the culture of his time. That was the equivalent of a suit. You dress in a Yemeni robe. You put a shawl and you dress in a certain way. This was the people of Mecca. They were dressed up in this manner, right? Okay, so in our time, what is dressing up? It's a suit or it's whatever it is. As long as the awrah is covered, the sisters obviously have to accommodate the Sharia requirements of the body being covered, etc. But as long as that is done, you accommodate the Sharia and your culture, and you come forth, with a happy means. And I believe that, inshallah ta'ala, Allah will reward me for looking dignified because I represent Islam to those people. I don't do it for my own ego. I do it because I'm representing a religion. And I don't want to look shabby. I don't want to look filthy or disgusting. It's something of the sunnah to look dignified, right? Our Prophet said, he saw somebody dressed shabbily and whatnot, and he said, has Allah given you any money? And the man said, yes, I have gold, I have it. So the Prophet said that Allah loves to see the effects of His blessings on you when He has blessed you. Meaning, why are you dressed so shabbily like this? Another man, his hair was here, his hair was there, and the Prophet said that when Allah has honored you with hair, then take care of it. Okay? So it means you don't come with an unkempt, you look dignified without being extravagant. I agree, you don't go beyond the means. But again, to give a simple example, with regards to gender interaction, like I said, keep it professional. It doesn't require a PhD in romance to understand what keep it professional means. We all know what professional is, and if a worker comes on to you, you need to draw the line and say, we're going to keep it professional. Simple as that, right? When it comes to alcohol, it is haram to drink alcohol. There is no two ways about that.
Referring to people going to.
No, I understand, I'm getting there. So that's the red line. That's the red line. Now, being in the company of people who are drinking alcohol, the least that can be said about it is that it is makruh. And makruh is not haram. Makruh is something you should avoid. So, my advice to people working in the corporate world, your immediate colleagues and your close friends should know that you do not like being in places where alcohol is drunk, even if you don't drink it. They should know this as your lifestyle. But once in a blue moon, something happens that requires the company to be at a particular location where alcohol is drunk, where there's alcohol in the corner and you're in the same room and there are people drinking there, for example. You know, your boss's boss comes and the whole team is going, you know, to have a meeting and yes, to celebrate something and whatnot, that a company achievement and whatnot, and you're not being there is extremely awkward. That should be the exception, not the norm, number one. And number two, even then, do the bare minimum, show your face that needs to be shown, and then leave when you need to leave. This is my position, okay? It should not be the default that every time we go, we go. And it should be something you hate in your heart, and it should be something you try your best to avoid, but there are times and circumstances where, you know, and I don't see it as haram, it is makruh. So makruh means what? It's better to avoid. But once in a while, circumstances dictate that that is right. And again, I have my personal positions. The same applies for shaking hands with the opposite gender. I have a very, you know, atypical fatwa. I believe it should be avoided, but I don't think it is sinful in the circumstances of a job interview. I don't think it is haram. I think it is makruh. It should not be your norm. It should not be done. But you don't have to come with your hand bandaged up and hand over here so that you have an excuse not to hand it out. And the Sharia is not that strict. Really, the Sharia is not that strict. And I'm not the only one to hear this, but the Shaykh al-Ghawi and many of the famous ulama have said the same thing. And I used to hold the other opinion, by the way, because it is the standard position, but you do the evidences and research. And actually you do find some exceptions. Even amongst the Shafi'i school, you have classical. This isn't some modernist reformation. Point is, you need to find your frame of reference, your shaykh that you look up to, and then every issue that arises, you can get your fatwa from. Bottom line, brothers and sisters, Islam is a religion that can be lived in every society and culture. Sometimes you might have to do things that aren't ideal. It's not ideal to go to an area where alcohol is drunk. It's not ideal to shake the opposite gender's hand. Sometimes you have to do this, but I don't think Islam is so strict that it will make life impossible. That will make life, yes, we draw the line, you cannot drink. Yes, we draw the line, you cannot engage in into. Of course there are red cut lines, but there are areas where it's best to avoid. And if once in a while you have to do it, ask Allah to forgive you, do an extra good deed, but don't make life impossible to live given the circumstances you're in. Jazakumullahu khair, brothers and sisters, I had a great time, inshallah. I hope that you also benefited.
We'd like to give a warm appreciation to Shaykh Yasir Qadhi.
I want a free upgrade.
Shaykh Yasir Qadhi, Jazakallah khair, really, really. Thank you so much for your time. We also would like to thank the online community who joined us. We also would like to thank the ISOC for putting this together. We also would like to thank Human Appeal who've managed to bring down the esteemed speaker. Am I right in thinking, you know, let me just do a quick plug-in on behalf of...
If you're going to plug it, then I might as well plug it myself.
Okay, so let me, in that case, I'll give you the baton in just a second. There's an interesting, theme that was running through today. The one which was, Shaykh Yasir Qadhi mentioned, was that we were talking about activism. And I think he mentioned the name of the project, Ramadan 10 project. You want to be active, please do get active. We have Ramadan coming up. And also, another way to get active is we have Human Appeal here. There's a stall. And please, support the organization's work. They do phenomenal work, both at home, both abroad. They have a stall here, so if you want to help out, do visit the stall and sign up. We have several of their staff members here, so you can ask them questions as well. in terms of how to get active and involved from a grassroots level, inshallah. So once again, a warm reception to Shaykh Yasir Qadhi.